Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Marvelous Monday. And what a surprise we have. We have our awesome Jessie with us again. And I'm sure you guys are delighted to see her this early in the week. We won't be on Wednesday. I'm in the middle of moving my life around right now. So it's a bit of a chaotic time. So this week's schedule is also a little bit topsy-turvy. But I do believe we posted a schedule, so just keep an eye out for that as well. So we have lovely Jessie with us again, and Morné, of course. How are you guys? Did you have a wonderful weekend?
I did. Yes.
Yes, it was awesome.
No
Awesome.
shenanigans this weekend. How about you, Morné?
No, no shenanigans, just for a change, because you're always up to shenanigans, Jessie. You know that.
Right? None this weekend.
Good. It's about time.
Good.
But firstly, I want to just say to our viewers a huge thank you for supporting our vet. Wow,
Yeah.
you guys certainly went all out, and I want to say how much I appreciate that, and I certainly know how much he appreciates the support that we've given him as well. So really, just thank you so much for that. It's amazing to see people come to the party, so to speak, right? When in situations such as these. So really, really grateful to everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah. Anyway, Jess, we are now over to you again because we are on this very exciting journey of firecrackering our way around Arrow right now.
Yeah,
I'm not,
definitely. And
I'm not sure
it's
how good
getting
that
more
is, but hey,
exciting. Yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, carry on. My internet.
Yeah, mine too. I was just saying it's getting definitely more exciting. I don't know if people caught it yesterday. I want to take a side note and encourage people. Um, Let me pull it up here too. You can follow either on my Twitter or on Timothy Homeseth, timothycharleshomeseth.com. But he put up a very interesting post that included a post off True Social from, um, we'll say, um, we'll say DJT, but on it he says, go to his website and in the search bar, write the word magic with a K in the search bar, spell it with a K instead of a C, and watch what comes up. Now, what's interesting is DJT just put up a post yesterday, and he said, I have the Staysure Senior PGA Championship in Aberdeen, Scotland on my great course, and I can't go. I have to stay around and fight off the crazed radical left lunatics. He calls them a whole bunch of other interesting names around that line, and he says, I wouldn't want to be in Europe and watch this country destroying scum work their disgusting and illegal magic with a C on unsuspecting Republican leaders who just don't think it is appropriate to fight fire with fire, but we will win. We will make America great again. So, I think it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of terms that for many years, for us survivors have not been acknowledged. Um, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that start coming out. So,
I feel that too. I think from all angles at the moment as well. There's more and more. But I think what also is going to start happening, and I'd just like to hear your take on this, is I think the information will never stop coming forth, right? But we're going to be getting more and more deep information. So, like, things that have really happened, you know, stuff like we're talking about now, where the average person on the street has no idea. So I mean, what is your take on that? Do you think that's also going to start happening now?
I believe so. I think that, you know, as information and things are exposed, you know, it is going to be out in the public eye, and the public has a right to know, you know, what has happened to children. I mean, this isn't
Yeah.
just, you know, it's not made up. It's not one person, you know, who's gone through, whether it's the super soldier programs or MK Ultra or the Monarch programs, you know, all the way I'll say even back to World War II. You know, that's really where it started, was that you know, the war never really ended. What we had were, you know, Nazis who came into our country, and they began to work with our military. They established the Brotherhood, or we'll call it the Luciferian Brotherhood system within the United States. You know, I've put in my affidavits that, you know, one of my top teachers was the Nazi Michael Karkock, who was the Legion of Defense leader for Hitler. And who was he responsible to, you know, pass his knowledge on to? It was Colonel Michael AQUINO and, we'll call him, you know, Boo. But those two individuals, you know, AQUINO was set to run programs and projects, you know, considered in the Western quadrants, both internationally as well as in the United States. And Boo oversaw, you know, programs that were over in the Eastern quadrants, in the US and internationally. And, you know, as we start to look at the books that AQUINO wrote, more and more about these programs come out. And it's important that we remember there were hidden terms. You know, these were programs that were not necessarily outright approved in their natural state by Congress. You know, there were terms that were hidden or exchanged. So, you know, one of the terms they would use instead of children when they were writing up their reports, that they, you know, that would go before Congress and our government when they were asking for funds and money, was the term potential. That's a term we just, you know, we've heard come out recently. You can search that term, look into that, especially on the website with Timothy. You know, so there was a lot that was hidden, and then, you know, where, you know, I've been bringing out how there was this whole other avenue for reporting and publishing. And it is my full belief that AQUINO published, um, you know, information that basically is considered above top secret. Um, you know, he held all of that information records, one, um, at a building that they called the Transformation Project in San Francisco, California. He also held that information on two of his personal computers. The one he called Glinda, uh, you know, which I've brought out, had information that was connected to Oz and Emerald City under the Pentagon, which is the underground city under there. His other
Can you
computer,
tell us
Thor.
can you tell us what sort of information they were finding? Is it really just this sort of stuff, or
Oh, I
anything as
believe it was
damning as like we were
I believe
seeing?
it was the actual reports from the underground cities and the projects, experiments,
Wow.
and programs pictures,
Okay.
films, documentation. I mean, when we think about people involved in these, we're going to bring out today Lucasfilms, but he talks about Lucasfilms, and we know that, when did the projects and experiments start? I believe that they started after NORAD received information from certain light side of the system individuals who gave them information about their experiments with a spiritual gate. That was late 1950s, early 1960s. So that's around the same time time frame, that they started up. I think the first generation of these programs, and some of this is what's documented in, or I believe was published in Fire Force, the Fire Force parody. And I think the two main bases where these programs stemmed or started at were NORAD and the Chicago base. But you also have several other bases that come out. His second computer was called Chronos, spelt with an X, and that demonic spirit is connected to the ocean as well as the subterranean bases that are considered Ragnarok. So that would include Antarctica. You've got the upper Antarctica that's located near Greenland area, which I just call the base up there. And then you have the Alaska base, which I believe President, or I'll say DJT, gave us the name for, which is the base that's off of the Aleutian Islands there in Alaska. So you also have the major indoor oceanic base, Carderock, and you have the Pasadena subterranean base off the coast of California. So I think that, those are the main bases he's talking about, but he even gets into what I believe are, that some of these stories includes other bases, which we're going to get into here. So today we're going to really kind of get into some of the characters as he defines them, but then some that come from terms. These were some of the same terms that he used in our training when there was directions or when he was speaking about certain things. It would be done in these sci-fi parody terms. So, it
Wow.
lines up with my training. It wasn't just by accident. He really was, um, as he said, a historian of these events. And let me see if I can quick find the quote where he literally says, as we get into the characters, let's see, I wanted to find the one where he's, yeah, I can't scroll through fast enough, but he basically says that he did not create the characters, that as they came onto the scene, he simply wrote down, documented what he saw happening, and that they became like friends later to him. So that's basically what he writes in the book, is that, he did not create these characters. They already were as they came onto the scene. He observed, he, documented and shared what he saw. So as we get into some of the main characters for Fire Force, and that book, it's kind of split. There's two different stories, or publishings from two different bases. So you have Fire Force, which is the Chicago underground base, and you have the Lost Ark, which is NORAD. But there are some interconnections. We have to remember sometimes they used multiple names or terms for things. And I think that was significant. So you have like the spiritual world. And we have to remember we live both in a physical and a spiritual world. It's both at the same time. I've described that spirit world as kind of being like that 5D chessboard, where you've got the middle or the earth plane, then you've got two heavenly planes above, and you've got two lower dimensions below. That lowest dimension is where the Lord chained the fallen ones, that, when they rebelled, he cast them out of heaven. And some of those that were too horrible to allow to roam, the Lord chained into that lower area. And then off of that lowest area, you also have an abyss, um, where some of them are held. So, they very well could be that lowest level, um, is connected to that abyss area, where you have some of um, the fallen ones that are reserved for end times are chained until those days.
Wow.
So the
What is that
first,
called, by the way? So, sorry to interrupt you. What is that called? The lower dimensions. Do they have a name? I mean, I know you talk about the abyss, but I would imagine the abyss is the lowest of low. What would the others be?
you have that kind of a middle one where, and there are more than just like, I'm trying to simplify it. We'll get into, some of those do have names, I believe, that AQUINO's bringing out, but you've got that middle one, which is more of like the subterranean land. So underneath the ocean, you have land, and they have, built bases that go, that maybe are partial in the water as well as under that land that's subterranean. You have, like, in those areas, you're going to have places like, Jewel Varnes wrote about, Journey to the Center of the Earth. You're going to have some of the underground cities that are partially connected or built up on that, like Atlantis. Atlantis is also called Urlantia, or Urlanta. You're also going to have the upper layers, so like, kind of the air layer, where they have floating military bases. That's going to kind of be your second heaven, and then above that you have the throne room of God and the courts of God. So that's kind of how I'm simplifying it, but you have many more dimensions. We've talked about, like in the system, you're really taught that there are 10. They call them the 10 major gates. You see that referred to kind of in the Encyclopedia Magica. That goes through some of the, it talks about the 9 gates. Why do they only refer to 9? It's because, they keep the 10th as a mythical gate, but that's purposeful. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, there's stuff that will be coming out more about some of that and the interconnections with that. Um, the in Freemasonry, well, once you get past like the 3rd master level, the first major ritual that they take, they hear the first name of God that's going to be whispered in their ear, and that name is Hameth Horhash. That is the spirit that is pictured for the Magica book as being kind of the first gatekeeper for those who are going to be accessing the gates. So then you have connected beyond him, you have the 9, what I consider the 9 demonic generals. So you have Abaddon, Baal, Molech, Ashtaroth, Baphomet, Leviathan, Azazel, and Toth and Samael. So each of them, they don't have access to those gates, which is why they need us humans, but they do station themselves as kind of doorkeepers of those gates. It doesn't mean that they really have control or not, but that's kind of the way I experienced it. So, some of the other terms that he uses for the spirit world are otherworld, galaxy, alternative universe, or parallel world. All those are interchangeable. I believe, when he speaks of galaxies, he's speaking of spiritual dimension databases. So I think that that was a term that even they would use in presenting terms to Congress for funding for some of their um, space adventures, we'll say, and space adventure missions to expand territory and land. And we have to remember, like with these this space is like we're meant in the movies and like the filmmakers, they've done a good job at making us just think space means, outside of our Earth sphere, and we see it more in the air type atmosphere. But space also includes under the Earth. All of that is uncharted, undefined territory. Some of it is, we are actually in the old uncharted territory. We know that, in those tunnel systems that they've built up and built over. So there are cities that are underground there. Some of those I've seen, even current day, like in the Portland area, they have, you know, there's cities that are way below in kind of that 3rd tunnel level area, but then where the city works and the utilities have themselves in tunnel areas, that's kind of the 2nd area of tunnel system. You have like the older city that they've literally built up on top of. So many cities are like that, so Portland area is one of those. You've got, all over Wisconsin has some of those where you go down there and you see actual houses in these tunnels. They've just built up on top of them. So
Wow.
some of those still exist. So anyway, one of the first characters he introduces is the character Krell Atlan. And that basically, he says, is that character is based off his wife, Lilith, who he calls the lady of his life. Now, what's interesting is that that term lady is very significant in the system. You would have regional individuals who would be in charge of, governance of the 5 departments of the system, which are the Masons, the Mormons, the Jesuit Catholics, the Satanists, and the Kabbalah. Those regional individuals are kind of how it's structured, is that they are considered lord and ladies of the land. Many times they're going to be connected to some of the aerial castles or mansions, and some of them even, um, if you're looking for the protectors or those who are providing peripheral protection, who are connected to the vampire department of the protectors, they're going to call them, be called lord and ladies. So it's run very much, like the English lord system. So it's interesting that he calls her lady. That term is used with high priests or lords with high priests, ladies with high priestess levels. I can tell you that definitely Lilith was a high priestess, or is still a high priestess in the system. And, so then our next question we have to ask is, is her connection with the Temple of Set and everything that her and AQUINO put into place, was that yet just a offshoot of the Satanist departments? We know originally that AQUINO worked closely with now I forget, LaVey, Anton LaVey. So, when they both wanted to go in different directions. And so in the 70s, there was a splitting up between the two that kind of formalized more in the 80s. But I would, propose that Lilith was and is one of the high priestesses of the Western quadrants. So the next,
Who did you say? Sorry, Jess, you just cut out there for a moment about one of the high priestesses of the Western quadrant.
yeah, so I said Lilith, AQUINO's
Lilith.
wife, is one of the high priestesses in the area, the Western quadrants. So with that,
If he's dead though, and if he's dead, does she still get to keep that position, or what
yeah,
happens then?
yeah, it's based individually, not based off of
Okay.
marriage alliances. Now,
Okay.
the other thing that's interesting in that, I don't know if she actually was what do they call it? Like knighted by the queen into an official lady position. She could have the title meaning both her position within the system as well as being an actual lady through her marriage to AQUINO, because he was the third Baron of the Campbell family. So she very well could be a lady because of her marriage to AQUINO, who was a Baron. So it could be
Okay.
both. And
Okay.
I don't know if she was knighted or elevated because of that. Next, you have
Okay.
the character he brings out in the book, Great George. And he says that is George Lucas, the filmmaker. So as we read this, get into this book, we're going to see another character, Great George, who comes out, and that's George Lucas. It's interesting because many of these people were involved in filming, documenting. I've brought out some of the individuals who were in charge of documenting during my time. You also had some that would come in from Disney, like Jim Henson. Some of those, I believe, were present doing this documentation of the project's experiments and the spiritual world access that, am privy to the biofeedback sessions, which were recorded as well as documented in written form. He then has a class of individuals he calls his sci-fi friends. Specifically, he says there are 30 others who are interested in the stories, the sci-fi. So that's kind of the core circle group, consists of, some of these individuals with those 30 sci-fi friends. Excuse me. Star Wars is, when he uses that term, it's referring to the Chicago-based program. But Star Wars did occur at other bases, just the Chicago one was the main one. So from there, they would those in that program would be sourced out. That was archived on Glinda, which is his computer that's linked to the Pentagon in Emerald City. So think about that, with that computer being linked to the Pentagon in Emerald City, who's monitoring, who's, having that information being gathered or working with? You've got Central Intelligence. And it's not by accident that, in all of this, you have one of the Nazi breeder programs, Liebesborn is kind of the main overhead term for it. But, I witnessed as a kid some of those nurseries, and one of the major nurseries literally was laid out, but it was all slatted in wood. So it was kind of like like you had the center area, and the wood was laid exactly like the design of the Pentagon building, and it was like wider stairways that went up, and then you had cribs that were kind of, the closest way I can describe it is kind of like the old. Many of the older churches had cribs in their nurseries where they had, the wood part that would come down. And so, that's how those looked then. But, why is the Pentagon designed after one of the main designs for Lebensborn? Is there more with that to Emerald City? So just some of the curiosity things. Andromeda was another name for the NORAD-based program. And that was mainly archived on Kronos, which is his second computer. And that one was linked to Antarctica and to, which is connected to the 3 major bases that are considered Ragnarok. He calls events in the spirit world, the term he uses to define events in the spirit world is personal fantasies.
Right.
He defines himself as the historian of events. Now, this is an actual position within the military, and I brought this out in one of my statements here, which was on Twitter. Let me see if I can quick pull up.
Okay.
It's also available on timothycharleshomeseth.com. But basically, let's see where it talks about the historian quote and the position. Let me see here. Let's see. So I talk about how, you know, that the system has profited off these projects, experiments, and that included in the selling it as sci-fi, publishing reports as sci-fi, and then selling them in the sci-fi world. So in that, I bring out how AQUINO called himself, let me just read some of this. So first, in these publishings, these reports, he documented on he even outright says it. Things were documented on Glinda, and, that's connected to the Wizard of Oz program and to Oz, which is also Emerald City under the Pentagon. All system training centers are connected by name to classic literature as a safeguard and a cover. This is a protective measure so that if a child tells or tries to explain things, it can easily be explained away or debunked. Later, other documentation from programs through other bases was added. We talked about Ragnarok, that's the 3 major bases. Then I get into, so here's on page 9 of Fire Force, AQUINO says, as a Space Force intelligence officer of the U.S. Army, I had access to resources at the U.S. Space Command, NORAD, and National Reconnaissance Office, enabling unprecedented precision in space sci-fi, as well as to the libraries of the Central Defense Intelligence Agencies and the National Archives for the Dr. Jones adventure. Accordingly, you will come across much in these pages which, as fantastic as it sounds at first glance, is quite real. So think about that. He defines another term then, how does he define the spiritual experiences? He calls them personal fantasies. So here he says, as fantastic as it sounds, at first glance, it is quite real. And he said, this too, I feel, is part of the philosophical parody challenge to tantalize the reader's curiosity and discernment. What are you discerning? You're discerning what's real and what's not, but he's already telling you it's real.
Exactly.
He defines himself as the historian. In that, so then there's the DoD published the position of classification standard for history series, On page 2, here's what it tells us about the position of the historian connected to the military. It says historians in the federal government are engaged in one or more of the following major areas of endeavor. First, planning and conducting special historical studies relating to current problems for use by agency officials and others in developing and modifying policies and programs. So a lot of their policies and programs would be done from their studies of the problems that were happening and occurring within the programs. Second, planning and conducting continuing or long-range historical studies to record the policies, programs, and operations of their particular agencies. And we're going to see a lot of agencies come out in this. Third, planning and preparing scholarly narrative or documentary histories for publication. That's exactly what he did with his parodies, as well as, you know, in the films, TV series. You know, why does he call himself a historian? Because literally he was planning and preparing narratives and documenting the histories for publication. For planning and conducting historical studies in connection with the establishment, conservation, restoration, and reconstruction, and interpretation to the public of sites of major significance in the military, political, economic, and cultural history of the United States. So, how did he, you know, because people aren't going to just accept, hey, we're doing all of this crazy stuff in the spirit world. We're training your children in spiritual warfare to fight with demonic spirits. You know, we're accessing other dimensions through spiritual gates. People aren't just going to accept that as it is at first glance. So how did they put that out? You know, he put it out as sci-fi, something that people could grasp, something that, you know, they did it with films and books, comic books to start to get people invested. So then we move on. We have the ark that's mentioned in these writings, which is the massive starship, NORAD. When he uses the term experience in the book, he's speaking of a spiritual encounter that one experiences as they read the prose that are embedded with magic in the book. So, you know, we talked about how he used certain magic symbols within his books. Those can open spiritual doorways so that, you know, if you go and purchase the book and read it, you know, the chances are that those spiritual doorways are not just going to open up. So I got to say that. But I would encourage you, pray, you know, anoint the book, pray before you read it. But he embedded it so that those who know how to use those magical tokens can get an extraordinary experience. They're going to have a spiritual encounter as they read what's embedded in the book.
So that's a guarantee, basically, one way or the other. And whatever encounter it is, I guess that's up to the human, how ready they are for whatever decision they're making, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I mean, when you think about it, you know, his publishing of these works, it really is a crime. against people who were involved in it, in these projects, experiments. And my question is there a secondary abuse there that, you know, because as people are, you know, they scheduled these publishings and reports, and we know that they at least went out to 30 other people. So when they access it, or even back through history, when they access those places, those times, you know, who are they getting access to? You know, are there some beta kitties who are called up every time that dimension's accessed? So,
Yeah.
you know, you got to ask
Wow.
what is happening with that. Were those people given that access so that as more events happened, they were able to be, you know, buy in to be present too? Were those some of the individuals that would be encountered in these experiments and projects? You know, did they get to play certain characters in those scenarios or events? It's very possible. You know, Krell, which is interesting because Krell is a place, you know, we're getting into some of the planets or places that can be accessed in the book. So there's a city, a galactic city named Krell. But what's interesting is that also is the first name he used for Lilith was Krell Atlan. So if Krell is actually Mars or Zion or Area 51, all interchangeable terms, is there a connection between his wife Lilith and Mars Zion, which is also known as Area 51? So that's on page 25.
I would say.
Yep. And he defines Krell. Krell is a civilization of pyramids with crystalline beings who inhabited Altair 4, which is another place. In that, you know, I've shared how Mars has pyramids underneath it. You have the certain ritual area that has giant skulls. They do use crystalline type skulls in there. And later, when we look at movies, you have George Lucas when he made the 4th Indiana Jones series, which, you know, that's the second part of this book. The Ark series is based off of the Indiana Jones. You have Indiana Jones. There's part of that movie takes place in that, you know, in what looks like that underground ritual area under Mars with crystalline skulls.
Wow.
So very interesting. So then he gets into some of the project and missional names. You know, so I propose that what he's speaking of were actual project or missional names. Every mission was kind of named. So he's got the Secret of Sith, Pantechnian, End of the Rebellion, and Kronos is also a missional name. And that's he defines that as a titanic ultimate conflict of 2 galaxies.
Wow.
So was there a war?
Wow.
I mean, think about this. Was there a war in Ragnarok? You know, was that war between Antarctica and Alaska or Antarctica and Greenland, between the 1960s and the 1980s. I think you're going to find stuff on that. Was there intermilitary war? So in this again,
Wow.
he talks about, he says about what's on the computers, the mathematics, the research and writing filled bank after bank of my hardworking polymorphic 8813 computers, Galinda and Kronos, that became such a horrendous mass of data that meeting the anticipated date for publishing was impossible. He says, you try working with two galaxies sometime. So, what are the
Wow.
galaxies? The physical world and the spirit world. But again, you have multiple dimensions. So he's documenting everything for those dimensions. Let's see. So one of the other characters I think we had brought out last time, he has other 40 acremen, which he defines as, that's Fury Ackerman, who is one of the sci-fi writer guys that he worked with. So in that, he shows how they circulated the material. He says the other 40 acremen did enjoy the pseudo-history, so much so that he dispatched a copy via time-space warpogram to our present-day solar system, Planet 3, which is Hollyweird, California. So in that, we got a couple definitions. Planet 3 is Hollywood, California. But in that, I believe we also have a name of somebody that he's working with there, publishing stuff with, and he calls that person California. And he says,
Oh, there's certainly lots to look at. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. So he says, and I read it with great interest and said to myself, why, this is much too unusual an item to simply let languish in limbo like Stuart J. Barnes' Tarzan on Mars. So here's another layer to this. Tarzan on Mars, I believe, is connected to a project that took place in the, I believe, in the early 60s, 70s. So Tarzan on Mars. So Tarzan is going to be the name of the main individual they were documenting on. Mars is going to be again connected to Area 51. So what projects and experiments were happening on there that are connected to that? And who's the main publisher of those reports? Stuart J. Barnes. So then it continues. So I'm presenting it here as a curiosity from which I believe you will derive an exciting reading experience. Bearing in mind that these events do not follow the path of George Lucas's history, nor the late Lee Brackett's. So Lee Brackett, another individual, nor any other authorized historians of Star Wars, but are, as he puts it, a personal fantasy of Michael Aquino's. Read on. And what again was the term personal fantasy used to define? It was used to define experiences in the spirit world. So he's saying that, he himself, how can he document some of these things? He's not just getting it from the biofeedback with the children or individuals in the experiments and projects. he also would accompany, these stem from his own personal experiences in the spirit world as well. And that's true, both he and Lilith. But then we got to look back, was George Lucas, uh, Ferry Ackerman, were these individuals also connected in those experiences? We have more now. I mean, there's even more people. He starts to get into specifics. Some of these characters will overlap with, other books or materials. But one of the interesting ones, who's another military individual, he brings out the character he calls the Imperial General Thurud Turklis. He says that is Colonel Richard L. Sutter. And he even says in the book, Colonel L. Sutter had authority of special operations, and the name Thurud Turklis is an anagram of Sutter. So the name is actually an anagram for the guy's real name. Well, who was Sutter? Let's look at who Sutter was. Oh, did it not pull up on here? Let me quick pull up here. So Sutter, here's some information from the DoD. Oh, let's see, where do I have it? Where did it all go? Let me maybe look up over here. Hold on. I do have it. I pulled it up this morning. Just gotta find it.
No problem.
All right. So Richard, they called him Richard or Dick L. Sutter. So he was based out of, says he was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but came to California via Maryland. Now that's where, Maryland is where Carteret Naval Oceanic Base is. But it says he considered himself a Californian. He was educated in Southern California, primarily in the Pasadena, Arcadia, and Covina areas, which we know are area, that's that main hub area that's connected to the California military base down there, as well as some other states' military bases. From there, it said upon graduation, he went to San Jose State. He was involved in the 4th Infantry Division, a combat tour in Vietnam, and a post at Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. His specialties, he had a Master of Arts degree in political science, and writing his thesis on the subject, it was called A Vision of Adam, Thoughts of the Political Wisdom of Abraham Lincoln. So it kind of goes on, but he was connected to South Comms, which South Comms had a lot of work that they would do connected to that California base and the Pacific Islands, which there's the interesting thing about that then is really you get into some of the underground cities that are in the Pacific Ocean, which are going to be like Atlantis and also called Urlantia. So we've got that character that comes out.
Regarding that, I'm just interested.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I know my internet is so bad. I don't know what's going on here, but I wanted to just ask you regarding the underground cities. I know we've spoken about Valhalla in the past as well on one of our previous shows, but I'm just interested. You know, Valhalla is a very strong Norse mythological city, if you will. But it's very interesting because, I mean, they've got Valhalla, which is, I know, the Viking heaven type thing, right? But what's interesting is in South Africa, in Pretoria, there's an entire area called Valhalla, and it is very much military based. So when you go to Pretoria, especially, and I'm going back especially apartheid days, right? Valhalla was very big military base area in South Africa. And then, of course, we have the underground Valhalla as well. So I'm just wondering if there would be any kind of connection
there are
through that you can.
It's very plausible. There are mirrored cities in the United States as well as internationally. So it could be that the two are joined by spiritual gates. So we'll have to look more. Is there, you know, we know like from the Kansas one, that one is documented and defined in the wording that the Brotherhood are supposed to reflect on in the book Initiates of the Flame. So it talks about that you have to cross Rainbow Bridge to get into Valhalla. We know that the Valhalla in Kansas, that you cross Rainbow, they literally call it Rainbow Bridge to get there. So that would be some things to look at. Are there land indicators around the South African one that maybe could indicate that there's more than one Valhalla? That's very plausible.
Wow. It's so contrived, isn't it? It's so layered and so multifaceted that it's just unbelievable. But actually, when you start knowing what you're looking for, and it becomes easier. Wow.
Yep. And a lot of those books, I mean, you know, you can go through, you know, Albert Pike, which his are going to get, they're not so much reflection books. You're going to get a little bit more of the introduction to, you know, the system type thinking, which would include some, you know, he does start to get into the spiritual beings like the seven seas, which is connected to the seven ascended masters. So you'll start to get some of that stuff in Pike, but definitely Manly P. Hall, you know, he focused a lot of his books on the regional areas, which he formats as the mythological, you know, to have people reflect on those truths, but it really defines how the Brotherhood were operating in different regional areas, and through, you know, there's defining things in there that when you really look, you'll be able to figure out where they were all located and operating out of. So then we're going to get into, there's a few other miscellaneous characters, but I want to save the best one for last. You kind of get into, he talks about Mark Hamill. So these are, you know, real people that are he's basing some of the characters off of as Lark Winddancer. But I would propose maybe some of these actors really were in these projects and experiments, and did maybe some of
Yeah.
them work with Lucasfilms. You have Harrison Ford as John Vallow. You have Alec Guinness as Kenobi Obi-Wan, and you have Carrie Fisher as Princess Laura Ozana. Who is that character? Princess Laura Ozana is based off of Ozma of Oz from Emerald City. So that comes out of the Wizard of Oz books. When you get to the second and the third books, you have Princess Ozma. Now, we know that Carrie Fisher is not Princess Ozma. That's, nor is she based off of the main individual at Oz, who is the princess there, or now they call her Queen Elle. So, so some of these actors, may indeed be filling in for the real people they're supposed to represent. So in that, we get into some very interesting things. It breaks down some of the things about Emerald City. He brings out that every city has a queen over it. Now that's true of the underground cities as well as the underground water cities under the ocean. So both are different governments, and you have, who are those queens? Are they mothers of darkness? No. Their actual positions, like their job is, instead of kind of like the regional rule in the United States and internationally on land, we have the hierarchy structure as I've laid it out, where you have the 5 mothers of darkness, you have the council. Underneath the council, you're going to have grand high priests and priestesses. Those individuals were referred to as mothers of darkness at times, but they would oversee by quadrant, north, south, east,
Okay.
west. So you have that same layout, only instead of grand high priestesses in the water worlds and the underground cities, they're called queens. You do have an interesting current day comment. We've talked about how when Gloria Vanderbilt died, you had a witchy battle between Beyonce and Meghan, Prince Harry's wife. And after that battle, when Meghan's subjecting her law, she's subjecting to Beyonce because she lost. What does she say to Beyonce? She calls Beyonce her queen. I believe that's significant because we know, Gloria had quadrant jurisdiction along with Laurie Cabot Kent over the Eastern Quadrant. But the question is, did Beyonce get established with more jurisdiction? Was she called a queen because she also gained jurisdiction over the Eastern Quadrant over one of the water cities? I think she did. So some of those things kind of are brought out. So over each underground city and water world, you're going to have a queen. You also are going to have 3 wizards who are connected to each underground city and water world. You also have wizards who are connected above ground too, quadrantly. But this is he's specifically speaking to the underground cities. So with that, you're going to have a white wizard. So that's going to be somebody who specializes in white magic. You're going to have a gray wizard who specializes both in white and black. And you're going to have a black wizard who specializes in black magic. So they're going, basically those wizards are usually Grand High Priest or High Priest level. So who is Princess Ozma? She's the rightful ruler of Oz, and this is on Wikipedia. Princess Ozma, it says, is a fictional character from the land of Oz, created by the author L. Frank Baum. She appears in every book of the Oz series except for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And these were published in the 1900s. But, as we really begin to look at this, we're given some time frames because we know that Oz is not a fictional place. Were some of these literature books, as I proposed, if they're connected to military bases, is there the possibility, were they fiction first? Or is it a possibility that that's the way that things were published as the Luciferian Brotherhood began to send Knights Templars in, and they begin to write up about their journeys and what they were finding? But anyway, so she's the rightful ruler of Oz. Baum indicated that she would reign in the fairyland forever, being immortal. So we know that Oz is considered also a fairyland, and they believe that she's immortal. That's another word for just, forgive my language, but damn, she's an old witch. I mean, that's basically what they're saying. There are some documented cases of those the system considers ancients who, the oldest one that I've been aware of was 300. But you can get them, in the 200 to 300 years old. I don't believe there's been any beyond that. So, it gets interesting is that she's also, so Ozma rules over Oz. Now, they say that, she's based off of Laura Lynn, who's considered Queen L, who was first mentioned in The Tin Woodman of Oz, is also known as the Queen of the Fairies. She's accredited with enchanting the land of Oz, so keeping it under a spell and enchantment. Prior to that, Oz was just an ordinary country, shut off from the rest of the world by 4 impassable deserts. I can confirm that, like on the one side of the city I've talked about, there's a mass cavern that's almost like the Great Canyon, and beyond that you've got what's considered dark lands where there's giants, and that there will be ritual sacrifices into the canyon for the giants according to treaties down there. You have, along with Princess Ozma, you have another character, King Pastoria, who's a part of that Emerald City. You also have one of the main witches that's named in The Wizard of Oz, Glinda. That's also the name of his computer. So what's interesting is that as you look into these cities, we see that each of those cities beyond, a queen, there are 4 witches, 2 each, along with the 3 wizards. So they have, north, south, east, west witches, and then the 3 wizards. So that's kind of their governing structure. Wizards present magical positions and biblical authority for miracles connected to Moses, Aaron, and their sister Miriam. Moses represents the prophet, Aaron the priest, and these are mirrored from the Egyptian priests and prophets whose names were Janus and Jambres out of Egypt. They were the ones when God sends Moses before Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh sent his magicians out, Janus and Jambres, and they were able to match Moses and Aaron in performing miracles and signs and wonders up to, I think it was the 4th plague. So the first 3, they were able to turn blood into water. They were able to throw down their rods and they would turn into snakes. The 3rd one was the frogs. They were able to call frogs up. But when the Lord turned the dust into gnats, they were not able to replicate that miracle and had to admit, this is the finger of God. And from that point on, the rest of the plagues, they were not able to replicate. What's interesting, though, is that we do know, we have witches and warlocks now that are connected to HARP and DARPA. We know that there's weather magic. We know that they're able to manipulate some of those things. So, that's where some of that studies comes out of the land of Egypt. So you've got, they represent Janus and Jambres, were kind of the mirror for Moses and Aaron. And then you have a group of women in the system who are the Seraphical priestesses or morning stars, and those are based off of Moses and Aaron's sister Miriam. And so you've got some of those connected, those Seraphical priestesses and morning stars are trained and connected to Emerald City. What was interesting is that AQUINO names a second study for the character, the character that he calls Princess Lorna Ozana, who's based off of Ozma from Oz. He says a secondary study for that, for Lorna, was Queen Elizabeth I of England.
Interesting.
Interesting, huh? And we know that that Elizabeth had a hidden twin, Lilibet, also called Lisbeth. So is it possible that Lisbeth is somehow connected to Oz, and maybe is that really Queen L? Because her real name's Lilibet. Is Lilibet really the queen of that? But when she needs to fill in above ground, she does so. So another character he says Peter Cushing as Doth Zarkin. And then you've got Death Razor, who's betrayed as James Mason during the same age and appearance as he played Captain Nemo in Walt Disney's 2000 Leagues Under the Sea. Were those missions run at Carderock? interesting character he brings out is the ghost of Nautilus, who makes an appearance in Seth's starship, he says. Remember, ghost is a position or a state of matter. We have documented military proofs of ghost warriors, the individuals who are able to change their state of matter. We know that beyond the physical and the spiritual, there's different classifications of spiritual state of matter. You have terrestrial and you have extraterrestrial. So those in the ghost state are considered extraterrestrials.
Jess, I want to just check. Are we going to carry on with this on the next show? We're going quite a bit over time here. And I want to just check.
I think we're just about done. We
Okay.
can carry on. We can carry on with that. So
then carry on. I think finish what you the section.
I think the next one start to get into besides the Galactic Emperor, who he calls Palpatine. This is the individual who was over the Old Republic, seized power by a coup, and he says it was based off of Sir Lawrence Oliver, who seized power at the time of the Spartacus Revolt, which was when the Roman Empire, or the Roman side of the system by the Vatican, seized power by the emperor from Judah's side of the system run by the Sanhedrin. So we get into some of those system wars. The only other one is Lauren Zampol, who is Paul Lauren Katner. This one was connected to the mission Pantechnicon, which you start to get into the cyborgs, those who are machine and human. So some interesting things. So we can carry on a little bit here in the next show. So I'll go ahead, I'll say a prayer. And
Yes.
Father, we just thank you. We thank you that some of these things are being explained, that we're able to connect these pieces. I just pray for anybody who may be having memories stirred or thoughts stirred up about their own past, their own childhood, their own experiences in projects, programs, or experiments. I ask that you would help us to put all the pieces together, that together we would be able to paint the whole picture of what happened to us in our experiences with the U.S. military, as well as in the Luciferian Brotherhood. And we ask for clarity. We ask that that you would just give all the pieces in their fullness. We ask for this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jessie. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So looking forward to the next show. I don't know where Shanti just popped out.
I know she popped out. Do we usually she gives a little break?
Yes, definitely.
Do we plan to start at about 9:30 for the next one then?
I think so, yes, too, yes. Perfect, yeah.
All right.
So let's do that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And please like, share, subscribe, and share. Get this information out. Very interesting how the dots come together. And yes, not only for us, but especially, like I said, for the survivors and overcomers. This is bringing their dots together as well. So thank you, Jessie. So we'll see you on Solutions in about 30 minutes, everybody. See you on the other side.
Sounds good.
Bye.